Welcome to part 4 of the Nativity Kings tutorial. In this part, we're going to be working on stitching the gifts.
We are now ready to stitch the gifts. If we go back to our stitch diagram, you can see that I say see making the gifts. And this is basically because I ran out of them. And there's a lot going on down here. So if we look at our helpful hints and find making the gifts, then we get more specific instructions of what we're going to do. So I'm going to start over here on the left with this kind of lidded box, and we're going to be working with 4-3-4, and we're going to start with the satin stitch and fishbone, which are both done with 3 strands.
To stitch this part, we're going to need to have some guidelines in the middle of our gift. They're shown on the pattern as dotted lines, so if you haven't traced them yet, now is a great time to do that. They're going to help us know when to change angles and how we need to make our fishbone and our satin stitches work.
So we're going to worry about the top portion first, and that is satin stitch, which we've had a bunch of practice doing, so you should be amazing at it now. And we're going to use 3 strands of 4-3-4. So I'm going to come up in this bottom corner here, and I'm going to try and get as close to these brown stitches as possible. I don't want to be able to see any of the base fabric in between these stitches and my needle. It'll make the lid look like it's not floating weirdly, but just right on the camel. And then I'm going to follow the angle of the edge and go down at the top. And then I'm going to make satin stitch all the way across until the tip of my line, the top of my line, is hitting this center line. But I'm going to follow this angle until I hit the center line, continuing to make satin stitch. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the angle of our stitches from angled to straight. So I'm going to bring my stitches to vertical, which means I'm going to slide a stitch under just a little bit right here. And then I'll do that again. I'm going to try and keep most of my stitches pretty tall and close together here, because I don't want to create a seam in the middle of this lid. I just want the stitches to change angle. And then I'm going to jump over to the edge and work back this way. Now we're going to move on to the bottom half, and we're going to work fishbone. And fishbone stitch is going to allow us to create a similar angle pointing into the center line on both sides of our box. You can see this line is going into the center here on the bottom. So just adding a little bit of detail to the bottom half of the box. So I'm going to work left to right first, because it's a little less confusing. So I'm going to come up right at the end of our line, our guide line here in the center, and I'm going to make a stitch a good chunk of the way down. So we just want to make sure this is covered and not in any way, not in our way. That's what I want to say. Then I'm going to come up to the side, either top or bottom, doesn't really matter. And then we're going to cross over, maybe not quite so far to begin with, that line, and go down. And then we're going to repeat on the other side, going to the bottom this time instead of the top. And I'm going to cross my line about the same point. And then we change sides again, going to the top. And this time I'm going to go both down a little bit and over towards the center, about 1 thread length, 1 needle length. Pull that down. And then we've repeated with the bottom half. And I'm just going to keep adding stitches like this until I reach the top corner of my box, and the bottom corner, I should say, till we reach the corners, till we fill in this side. Now that I've filled into the corners, I'm just going to work my way across the top and bottom edges, continuing to just overlap this center line a little bit as I work my way across. Now I've made it to the center, and I'm going to do just the exact same thing I did with the top. I'm going to angle some stitches into kind of this center point here to help change the angle of stitches so that our center stitches are vertical. I'm going to leave that center line exposed and come over to this right hand side and begin making stitches. Now I recommend that you start with this kind of top stitch right here and kind of fill out what's happening on the other side. Imagine, you know, this is probably the edge of your box right here. So where does this corner stitch go? It goes right about here, I think, looking at the other side, maybe even a titch farther over. And then I'll come back up behind it to add a stitch or two to fill in this space so that our stitches mimic the other side and we're not having holes. On that same train of thought, there needs to be something going on here at the bottom. So I'm going to make, hold that a little tight, teeny little stitch here. And I'm going to pull in here to overlap, and one from here. That's going to need to overlap as well. Now, if this edge doesn't look super beautiful, that's okay, because we're going to run a line of stitching all along here for this gift here, the center one, the gold one. So if they don't match perfectly, it's going to be okay. And then I'm going to go back up to the top and come down to the center, pull it over. And then I'm going to think about how this bottom is working. The bottom angle is probably steeper than this line right here. So I need to make a line from about the corner here across. And then come back up to the top. And again, I'm going to envision this line. If I'm mimicking the top, I'm probably coming up right about here. Now from here, you should have enough thread left that we're just going to pull out a single strand, and we're going to make a line of backstitch right here along this top seam, in between the lid and the body, and along the bottom of the box. So pick your favorite place to start, and we're going to work across there. And we're doing this for similar reasons to why we did it around the ear. It's just going to help kind of solidify these lines and give them a nice little accent, as opposed to having any sort of fabric show through between the two sections of satin stitch. So run a line of backstitch here and then the next two sections. Now for this bottom row, I'm going to put in extra special effort to make my line of stitching be as straight as possible, because a few of my stitches here along the bottom were not quite perfectly placed. So if I make the extra effort here to make sure that my line is straight, and not just follow the bottom of the box. I should create the illusion that the bottom of my box is perfectly straight, as opposed to what it was a few seconds ago. And there is our first gift box done. I'm going to move on. All right, let us address this middle gift here. Let's bring back in our guide. We're going to be using 783 for the bottom and the top, and then this middle portion is 3829. We're going to be using 3 strands of all of it, and we're going to work bottom to top. So we're going to start with this bottom section here and then work our way to the top. Now, like always, I'm going to check my lines, and I'm feeling like this right side is a little funky as compared to my left side. So I'm just going to change, come on pen, this curve just the teeniest bit so that I can see better what I need to do. And we're going to start by making some foundation stitches. So I'm going to start here in the middle. I'm going to go up and then down right here in the center on the bottom. And we're going to kind of fan out our stitches along the bottom so that they all come in towards the center part at the bottom, as opposed to having them all be parallel straight stitches. So that means our next stitch, I'm going to leave a gap. I'm going to come up to the side here. Make sure all that pulled through. Nope, it did not. Some things are easier when you can see the back of your hoop. And then I'm going to come down at the bottom pretty darn close to this first stitch. Not right in it, just right next to it. Then we're going to repeat. We'll leave a pretty big gap here at the top. Come down to the bottom. I feel like these are getting just a smidge tight. Pull those a little bit looser. Then I'm going to come all the way over to the corner and come down. And then just to help my brain see the last part, I'll come about this far down here on the side. Make a stitch here into the bottom as well. Now I'm just going to fill in the rest of the space. We're going to start from the bottom here. You can see that I've got a little bit left right here underneath this stitch. So I'm going to come up on the first part of the line I can see right there, then go down even under this previous stitch a little bit, and then back up the line here. Just going to be blending these stitches into the previous ones I've got here. So nothing else needs to come all the way to the bottom. I'm going close to the bottom to pull that down kind of in and under the previous stitches. And then I need one more at least to fill in this gap. And then I'll come up between these two. And again, I'm going to feed my needle down in between here, sliding under one or the other, just a little bit to have this end disappear in. And then I'll work stitches from this top line down in, and we'll repeat onto the other side. The next step here is we're gonna stitch these stripes here. And we're going to do them with 3829, if I believe that number is correct. It is. So I'm going to trade over to that, and then we're going to work on those lines in the middle. All right, we're going to be making lines of whipped backstitch. So to make whipped backstitch, in case you've forgotten, or this is your first nativity hoop, we're going to make a line of backstitch first. So I'm going to work my center line first, and then probably my edges, and then these in between ones, because my lines got a little funky as I was tracing. So this is going to help me space things. So to make backstitch, you're going to make a straight stitch straight along your line. Then you're going to come up the same stitch length away on the line, then down at the end of the previous stitch, and repeat. Up a stitch length away, down at the previous stitch. And we'll just go all the way up this line here. Adjusting as I go, trying to make sure that this line stays as center as possible. Because by this point in your stitching, things could have easily shifted just a little bit, which is never a problem. I just want to make sure you're being aware of it. I'm going to jump over to the right hand side, and I'm going to stitch as close to the camel as I can get it. And I'll go down here. And now I'm jumping over to the left side to stitch this line. Now, before things get any tighter, I'm going to whip these stitches, which means we're going to slide our needle under each and every stitch, pulling the thread through to kind of make these look like tubes instead of lines of backstitch. We get to go the easier direction. We're going to go out under towards the right. And the reason I just changed my mind is because we have to continue going the same direction with all of our stitches. And here on this left-hand side of our hoop, all of our stitches are right up against something else. So I'm going to flip over to the eye of my needle, and then I can slide the eye in between the two stitches and then get it to come out through here, as opposed to trying to come out into all of this is quite a bit more difficult. So slide down through in between the stitches, so you kind of get the eye all the way down to the fabric first. I'll whip this line, I'll go through the center, down the other side, and then I will fill in the remaining two lines following this same idea. Anytime I'm close to other lines, using the eye of the needle to go through, and it's easier to go down in between existing stitches rather than trying to come up in between them. To finish, we just go down at the end of the line, pull our thread down, and move on to the next area. I'm going to pause real quick before I whip back down here, because the next stitches, well, we need to do two things. I need to put a stitch along the bottom in between all of these little vertical lines, but then I'm also going to put 3 horizontal stitches right here. And since my thread is at the top, I'm going to save just a little bit of thread, not a bunch, and make these horizontal stitches real quick. So I'm going to come up on one side, trying to stay real close to the top of all these lines, and just make 3 horizontal stitches, just going from side to side in the lines right here. And then I'm going to whip my stitches back down here. I'm going to use the back of my fabric to help me out here. If you push from below, right where you need to stitch, it kind of makes a hill. So there's valleys all around where your needle can come out easier. And now I'm just going to make a straight stitch along this open bottom space. Now if you are stitching the ornament version of this hoop, this is one of the locations that is going to look a little bit different than this larger hoop version. On the ornament size hoop, you only have three vertical lines instead of 5, and you can 3 vertical lines instead of 5, and I'm pretty sure I only did 2 horizontal stitches. Otherwise it's the same. There's only 3 vertical lines and only 2 stitches above. With that final horizontal stitch done here, I'm going to anchor off, switch back to 7, 8, 3. So many floss numbers. Back to the lighter yellow we've been working with, and I'll fill in the top. Now we're going to jump back to satin stitch for this top section here. And we're going to kind of do a combo of some parallel stitches. I'm trying to get it. There we go. If I get it too close to the brown stitches up here, it will split them apart, and I don't want to do that. Okay. We're going to do a combo of straight stitches and angled stitches. Our center stitches here are going to be mostly straight, but then as we work our way towards the edges, we're going to fan out a little bit. So this stitch I'm going to bring down to the same point as the previous stitch, which you can see has changed the angle just a little bit. And then I'm going to come in the vicinity here, making sure that my stitch is going under these horizontal stitches so there's no gap. That feels good, like I've covered all the space on this side. So I'll do the same on the other side, and then we're going to make a big French knot. We're going to make a big French knot right up here at the top, but the only catch is we want this French knot to be made with 6 strands, and I only have 3 on my needle, and I don't want to have to rethread and find 6 strands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my needle until the end, like this, on the back. What this means is that I'm going to go up a little space away from the top here, because we're looking for a pretty big French knot, is that now that tail is caught on the back side. I don't have it coming through at all. So I have 6 strands in the fabric without having to restring my needle. So I just caught the tail on the back of the fabric, and now I'm going to wrap probably at least 3 times around the needle. So I've made a circle from the thread to my left hand over to my right. If I was left-handed, I would go the other way. You make 1, 2, 3 wraps, and then I'm going to go down on the side closer to our little jar here, and then you slide the knot towards the fabric. You don't want to pull too tight, and then I'm just going to keep this tail out of the way as I pull my thread straight down here to make a French knot. Just pulling some threads until everything comes in. And now I've got a cute little bobble top to our bottle. I'll anchor this off, and then we're going to switch to 0.8 to make the gift on the right. All right, for our last gift here, we're gonna make a chain stitch on the bottom. We're going up and down, satin stitch across, and then some big French knots here on the top. So our French knots are with 6 strands again. Otherwise, we're using 3 strands of 0.8. So I have got 0.8 on my needle, and I am going to start with the chain stitch on the bottom. So I'm going to come up here on the top of this line, go down basically in the same spot or very close to it. I'm going to hold a loop, not over on my fabric, hold a loop here on the top, come up, and I'm thinking about 3 stitches. My original pattern has 3 stitches each direction, so this is about 1/3 the way down. You could change that to be just 2 stitches if you want, or make teeny tiny ones and have 4. Choice is yours. And then I pull the direction I'm stitching as I come up through that loop. Then we're going to go down where our thread is coming from inside that chain. I sometimes struggle to visualize through my loop what I'm doing, so I like to pull my loop to the side. Both are great options. That's just what works good for me. You can see here also with our thread out of the way that my needle is not right on the line. Chain stitch is wrapping around your needle, so you need to have a little space between the edge and your needle so that your chain stays inside the lines. Then needle goes up through the loop, pull the direction you're stitching, and we repeat real quick here for, oh, I was splitting some threads. For the end, I'm gonna come up right above my line. This corner one might be a little bit shorter because we got a rounded corner to work with. Making sure I'm getting it all the way snug. And then we're gonna go down on the outside of the chain to anchor. And then we're gonna repeat. This time going back up. So again, you can see my needle is not touching these chains that we just made. We're gonna give a little space for the chain stitch to finish. And down very close to the same spot. Now this time around, I can use my previous row of stitches as a guide, and I can see that my stitches end pretty close to that on the previous row. So I'm just gonna go up there, pull through again, pulling the direction I'm stitching, go back down through, again using the previous row as a guide. And I will just repeat this process, clear through the whole bottom until I have everything filled. Here by the middle gift, you can see that my line of stitches is ending behind this gift, if you will. So what I'm going to do here, instead of finishing like I would for chain stitch, I'm going to go down into that side over there and come up through the chain and go down over towards this side. So essentially I'm making 2 straight stitches that go under this edge. So the illusion continues that I have a full chain stitch. It's just been cut off by this last gift. Now I'm going to try and we need to make this be able to be a chain. So I'm going along the edge here. You can see here with it pulled to the side how my first stitch is here and my second stitch is here, just kind of following the edge of that gift, the jar there. And then I'm coming up in line with my other stitches. So this will be a really small top of a chain stitch here. But again, we're just going for the illusion that everything is working out exactly how we want it to. And up here to the top to anchor that down. And if I felt like there was enough space on this side that I needed to fill it in, I would just make one little straight stitch there. But I'm feeling pretty good about how that is. So now I'm going to make my satin stitches, and my thread is on the left side. So I'm going to come up on the left side. There really isn't a better or worse side to do this from. And you just go all the way across, horizontal satin stitches, until we have filled in the top of this box. Satin stitch should be pretty darn familiar at this point for you. I ran out of thread right at the end, so I got my second half of my strand, and it's 3 strands, and I need 6. So this time, since I'm not in the fabric, what I'm going to do is I thread my needle onto the end, and then I pull it into the middle so that both sides of my thread are together. And then I'm just going to tie a knot here in both ends together. And now again, I've got 6 strands, but I'm using my small needle. Now we're going to put 3 French knots right here along the top. And in my head, I imagine the box finishes just a teeny bit over here, right? That this curve would finish down here. So we can see most of the box. So I'm going to try and come up centered first for my center knot. Now the most important thing you can do right here is to split a strand. So if I come up in between strands, you can see that as I move my needle, you can see the fabric. We don't want to do that. If I get the tip of my needle to split a strand, when I move it, you can see that it's caught. It's going to go through a strand, which just means that I'm not going to be able to see the fabric through what's going on. I'm going to check one more time, make sure that I'm feeling pretty good about my placement. And we're going to make big chunky French knots. So again, I'm making my circle from my left hand over to my right. Again, reverse that if you're left-handed. We're going to wrap 1, 2, 3. And since I want this to be centered, I'm going to go down pretty close to the same spot. I don't want to hit exactly the same spot because that could pull my knot out. Then I'm going to slide all of my thread down to the fabric, hold the tail out of the way, pull down, and then kind of help it out there at the end. And then I'm just going to go to the side, center between my 2 spaces here, again making sure that I'm splitting a strand, not going in between a strand. And there we have it. Our knots are in the place that they should be. If for some reason you couldn't get your thread to stay where you wanted it to, you could always sneak another horizontal stitch either under, between knot to knot or something. So don't worry about what's happened once your knots are in. Most of the time I can convince it to sit where I want to by just using my needle and pulling things back together. But if for some reason, if you'd created an open space, just fill it in. No one's gonna know. All right, this finishes the bottom of our hoop, which is kind of momentous. From this point on, we're just going to be working with some fun detail. Next, we're going to be filling in the camel, his blanket, which is pretty exciting. Going to do some fun textures there. And then after that, we will work our way up and finish the rest of our kings.